Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday. Joining me on set is Shaka himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Well, unfortunately, I can't really tell you, as I often say, that I'm hugely terrific.
Why not?
Or that I am simple, easy, and awesome. Because I lost a childhood friend, Peter Rugarama.
My condolences to you.
Thank
Shaka.
you very much. A kid from Kabale, where my journey in life began. And as you know, I am working on a memoir whose working title is Defying the Odds, the story of the Kabale kid's journey from Kabale to Washington, D.C. And Peter was one of those key guys that had in fact agreed to make a contribution to that particular journey. So may his soul rest in eternal peace, and of course condolences to his family. And also I am disturbed by what is happening in South Africa. You know what is happening in South Africa, the xenophobic type of behavior. It puts a lot of people's lives in danger. It is not the first time it has happened. It has happened several times. But I guess given the history of what was once apartheid South Africa, the type of colonialism that obtained there for centuries, I guess one can probably put certain things in the context. But I think it's a high time that the government really stepped up and figured out how to address some of those issues.
Speaking of the government, let's go to a comment here. Let's go to Gerald Mwitawa. He says, why are South African leaders not addressing xenophobia with the urgency it deserves? Maybe in fairness to the president today, he came out and strongly condemned what's going on. But that aside, why is it happening? I remember in 2008, over 60 people died as a result of these attacks. Today we are seeing all sorts of things happening to immigrants
it also
who
happened,
are Africans.
In 2015.
Right.
Mind you, when you talk about it is happening to Africans, whom they, in their local lingua, they characterize as makwere. These people come from other African countries whose governments supported the end of apartheid very, very much, and helped, in fact, South Africans who needed social political sanctuary for years and what have you. But I think that again you have to look at the situation in South Africa and put it in historical context. You're talking about a society that was built on socio-economic injustice for centuries, really, and for decades under apartheid. So it's not something that has quick fixes. It's not something that you can address it through an incident or an event. It has to be a process. And South Africa, as we know it now, came into being back in 1994. So one could probably say that the government should be given an opportunity to figure out the best possible solutions to address that issue. But it's an issue that is not going to be very easily addressed, because you're talking about millions of people who do not have the appropriate skills, for example, to put in a situation where they can earn a decent living. You're talking about a population, for the most part, that was denied not only education, but quality education. So you're talking about a population that did not know what hope meant, a population that did not know what opportunities really are or what they meant. So it is going to take a sort of social, cultural, I guess, Marshall Plan, so to speak, in order to provide the needed and the badly needed hope in order for South Africans, really, at least the vast majority of them, to feel that they belong.
What do you make of the argument of some scholars have said that South Africa shouldn't be the country that is actually, or South Africa shouldn't be the people that are attacking immigrants, because when they were dealing with the apartheid regime, a lot of African countries opened up their doors and allowed in South Africans ready to seek a refuge there. So this shouldn't be the time for them really to attack other Africans.
I think you are right, but you see, it is not the government that is attacking the Africans from other African countries, nor is it in fact, at least there are no facts suggesting that there is a government policy. No, it is individuals taking things in their own hands because they are very frustrated. You come from Uganda, and you know as well as I do that there are situations, for example, where you have internal migrants, people who came from my part of the area, the Bachiga, because they come from a place that could not provide them the sort of land that could sustain them, and therefore there were policies that helped some of these Bachigas become migrants and immigrated to places like what was once called the Kingdom of Unyoro Chitara, the Kingdom of Toro, the Kingdom of Ankole, and what have you. And you know what happened to some of these immigrants in Bunyoro? There were problems because some of these people came, and as you would expect, they were obviously very, very hungry. They worked very hard and became prosperous. And some of these locals began to look at them, obviously, as threats to their lifestyle, competing for what they thought actually belonged to them. So in the context of South Africa also, when you look at the average South African who is sort of practicing some of this xenophobic behavior, these are people who are not aware of the political history we are talking about. It really has nothing to do with them. They are talking about their immediate needs and requirements in order for them to be people who are human beings. And these are people who somehow look at these African immigrants from other African countries as people who are coming to take away their jobs, to take away their opportunities, and in some cases also to compete with them when it comes to the services that are provided by the government and all that kind of stuff. And people in those types of situations usually look for someone to blame, really. They look for something that they feel comfortable blaming in order to feel that they are at least, somebody. It is not limited to South Africa. Sometimes you see this happening in Europe. You go to Germany. When the economic indicators are down, you begin to see some of these people exhibiting, what some would characterize as racial tendencies and all that kind of stuff. Sort of blaming sometimes the victim, as a matter of fact. So I think the government needs sincerely to sit down and figure out a very long time sort of solution that will help address some of these issues.
Yeah, Shaka, before we continue, let me apologize to our audience. We are not streaming live. We are having some technical issues, but as soon as the signal gets back on air, we should be able to continue with our show. Shaka, speaking of immigration, it's not just South Africa that is dealing with this immigration issue. When you rightly talked about how Europe is looking at immigration. But we also have the same issue here in Africa, rather in the United States. You have a lot of people wanting to come to United States. You have a lot of people wanting to go to Europe. You have a lot of people wanting to go to these African countries that are doing very well. What are those factors that are pushing, and those factors that are pushing these people to leave their respective countries?
I think obviously the factors are social, political, economic. You find, for example, that a lot of African countries are democratically challenged. And if they are democratically challenged, what it means is that these are societies that are not built in a manner that is based on what you would call or driven by strong institutions. These are not societies of laws that are governed by laws where everybody, including the top guy who happens to be a president or a prime minister or a king or a queen, is not above or beyond the law. You're talking about societies sometimes which, in a sense, are controlled by individuals who happen to have power. If they were democratic, for example, where you had strong institutions, it would be very, very difficult for those types of situations to be created, whereby people feel very uncomfortable, frustrated, and they want to get out yesterday because they think that they can in fact get greener pastures elsewhere. So I think what it is that democracy is very important. I know that some people, when you talk about democracy in Africa, they say this is something that belongs to the white man. Democracy does not belong to any particular race. Democracy is not something that is limited to certain geographical locations and what have you. Democracy is a universal value that is based on social, economic, political justice. It talks about justice for all of us, not some of us. And I think these are some of the values that frankly are missing.
And that's what's pushing people.
That's what's pushing people, and of course the forces that are pulling people.
Employment and all that stuff.
Precisely, where some of these things which do not exist in these undemocratically, these are democratic societies. These things exist in societies that are democratically and well governed. That is why there are a lot of Africans, for example, doing the dying for all of us in the Mediterranean Sea. Guess what? They're trying to go to Europe. They're trying to go to Italy. They're trying to go to Germany. They're trying to go to almost any European country there because they believe, and there is some evidence to boot, that once you go there, you begin immediately developing a smile on your face.
Let's move along. My producer tells me that we are still having technical problems, but we are streaming live on www.voanews.com. So if you're one of our fans and you want to follow this discussion, you can log into www.voanews.com. Let's move on, Shaka. The Pope, one of the most celebrated people on this planet Earth, is making his second round to Africa, and likely he will be in Mozambique, Mauritius, and one other country, and Madagascar. So what's the significance of this trip to Africa?
He, of course, brings spiritual blessings to these people. But what is interesting about the Pope, you talk about how powerful a figure the Pope is, which is true, but in relative terms, the Pope used to be even huger even much more powerful a long time ago. You used to have the Popo Bull, where they could divide the world into spheres of influence and all that kind of stuff. And as a matter of fact, when you talk about the Pope, you're talking about the head of the Vatican. The Vatican happens to have the distinction of being the smallest nation of state, as we know it, in the world. But you know what? At one time, there was this mighty Roman Empire, which pretty much presided over the world as we know it today. But guess what? The only thing left out of those great days of the mighty Roman Empire happens to be the spiritual aspect as reflected in the Vatican and therefore the Pope.
Let's move on. Let's go to another comment. One of your Facebook fans, Belkan Kabwe in Zambia, says, "Dear Shaka, you are an African media expert and inspiration to many. I have been a fan of yours since I was in primary in 2000. So, what is the best way to encourage African youth in pursuing the type of journey that you've had for the good of Africa?" Good, very good question, Shaka.
That is a very, very good question, Brother Kabwe. First of all, one has to be able to identify what they want. You have to be able to identify what you want, because when you do identify what you want, then you have the opportunity to look for the appropriate tools that you might need in order to navigate and negotiate your way to your destination. But in fact, I should be able to say that all of life really is about passion, is about action, is about reaction. And to ignore the passion, the action, the reaction of your time or your generation is to risk having not really lived at all, to occupy space. And Paul, let's face it, when you look at Africa, for example, it is an incredibly endowed with wealth. It's like an individual who has no teeth but is given a bull to devour it. What we really lack in Africa today, not only to develop the country, but also to inspire the youth, is what is called leadership. There is a leadership deficit. For the most part, our leaders, to me, I agree with some of those who actually refer to them as rulers. These are rulers because they do not consult, nor do they actually listen to their people. If you are a leader, you cannot move far away from your people. Most of the things that you do have to be a reflection of the concerns, of the hopes and dreams of the people themselves. But in this particular case, you have a set of rulers, a set of individuals who are patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends, not society, not country, but they talk the talk without walking that particular talk so that their people can actually do the work.
Shaka, how about the issue of education, having quality education? For example, investing in the human resource. Just for example, like Singapore was able to really lift itself out of poverty, and they're now considered first class because they invested a lot of resources in the human infrastructure or human capital. Can that example work for Africa?
That is an excellent point. But in order for you to embrace education, you have to talk first about leadership. the reason Singapore became what it was in terms of education, in terms of development here and there, was because of its founding leader, the celebrated Lee Kuan Yew, the man who became prime minister of that city-state for 31 years, whereby he was able to develop that city-state from a third world, backward type of water type of place to a first world. You've traveled.
People say he was a dictator, and in some cases in Africa we are dealing with such dictators.
To be honest with you, if there is such a thing as a benevolent dictator, he probably was. He was in the sense that he believed that, which is something like Ubuntu, he believed that I am because you are. He believed in the idea, for example, of being there for your neighbor, holding your neighbor's back. He believed that there were certain, perhaps, individual civil liberties that could probably be overlooked if those were to be in the interest of the entire society. For example, when it came to education, everybody was entitled to have unfettered access to those types of skills, because Singapore had 3 large communities: the Chinese, the Indian, and the majority Malays. But he made sure that all the 3 interacted and they had a right to access the same privileges and rights.
I can say that we are finally streaming live. Let me do a quick follow-up. How about people who argue that maybe that perhaps the current educational systems across the board, and I'm talking from maybe primary level to university level, maybe need a rethinking of some sort?
It is very interesting that you raise that point, Paul, because as a matter of fact, tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa, we are going to be talking about rethinking the educational curriculum so that it can actually be the sort of curriculum that equips the students, equips the young people with the type of skills, the type of knowledge that is needed for them to be able to effectively function in the real world. We're talking about, again, a place like Singapore, which makes sure that not everybody necessarily has to go to university. Not everybody necessarily has to be an intellectual. But you can also use your fingers, for example, your hands, and what have you, but produce a product that is very valuable to such an extent that you can also be reasonably well rewarded, so that you do not really wish that you hadn't gone to university. Germany does the same thing. That's why it produces some of the best automobiles on this planet Earth. Because for the Germans, they make sure that even the skills that you get in technical institutions and what have you, they are as highly rewarded as the skills that you get from university, education and all that kind of stuff. So you definitely need education, you need discipline, you need to have self-confidence or develop confidence in the self, in yourself. You need, again, like I said, to be able to identify what you want. Once you are able to identify what you want, you look for the appropriate tools in order to negotiate and navigate your way to your desired destination. And once you are able to do it again, you need to essentially focus at what you are trying to do, like a laser beam.
Let's go to David here, who gives you a compliment. He says, Dear Shaka, I got straight A's in political science at university because I listen to this program every week. Shaka, you are such a great analyst. But another comment here comes in and says, how about skilling? We talk about people getting these professional degrees, but they graduate with little or no skills. How about that?
Well, it means that if it doesn't work, we have to figure out a way of tweaking it. There is always room for improvement, because at the end of the day, the only way societies have developed, it is through sometimes failing somewhere first. And failing, in fact, at the end of the day, you should look at it as part of success, because it sort of provokes and challenges you to such an extent that you correct where you went wrong and get it. And at the end of the day, working very hard and focusing like a laser beam and really working hard and having the passion for what you are trying to do, you could find yourself on top of your game.
Is there like a model that a lot of African countries should follow when it comes to education, and how many or how much skills they can impart on their people?
Oh yeah, there are some countries that are very successful. One could look at Canada, for example. One could look at Singapore. One could look at Germany. But when I talk about education, you should look at first of all, your own society. Look at what is available and how you can possibly best use it to such an extent that it can provide dividends. You know, I sometimes say, when you're confronted with some of these difficult situations, what you have to think about, don't worry about what you don't have. Worry about what you have and how best you can use it, you can utilize it in a manner that can bring the best results out of you. That is why I say sometimes that you go to war with the army that you have rather than the one that you wish you had.
Just like Donald Rumsfeld, the famous. On that note, I think we are running out of time, but it's been a great conversation, Shaka.
Thank you very much, and of course, once again, you came with a great shot.
Yeah, thank you.
You're most welcome.
I look forward to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington. Thank you.